Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning. In fact, it was a little bit frightening, but they fought with expert timing.
Folks, I am excited. Why am I excited? Because this is probably the first time since I started this segment of the show that I can honestly recommend that you go out and hunt down this movie. It is that awesome. It's not like you'll have to spend very much on it either. I found this movie sitting in a bargain bin in my local game store of all places, just sitting in there with a bunch of other movies for about $3, and that was it. Now, while I'm usually a very skeptical person when it comes to movies picked out of a bargain bin, there were two things on the cover of this movie that immediately caught my interest. First, it had the same action choreographer as The Matrix and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I really actually still admire those movies for their action scenes. And second, it was produced by Quentin Tarantino. The movie takes place in a time of feudal strife in China where several warlords and terrible flooding have all but destroyed the crops and economy of the land. Seeking refuge, thousands of refugees have fled to the mountain villages hoping for some relief, only to find corrupt villagers and the Shaolin monks who used to be their protectors have been bought out and are now part of the politics of the land. 'Cause, you know, any movie taking place in ancient China has to take place during times of strife. It's an actual law now. However, during this time of turmoil comes the Iron Monkey, a ninja-esque martial arts master who uses his powers to steal back all the money taken by the greedy politicians, and then gives everything that he gets back to the people in hopes of making their lives a little bit better. Yeah, as much as I like this movie, I have to admit the story is probably its weakest point. It's basically just a retelling of the old Robin Hood story, and a very basic retelling at that. Now, the story itself is really nothing special, but what is kind of interesting, though ultimately pointless, is that it's told through several subplots, each with a few different characters who intersect and cross with one another on several different occasions. The first of which being a doctor who actually happens to be the Iron Monkey named Dr. Kang, and his lovely female assistant, Orchid. I could think of several other names that are a bit more attractive than that, but then again, I'm just a pasty white guy. Anyway, the other subplots mostly revolve around the politicians, who are the main villains here, but their story is mostly treated for harmless slapstick, and it also involves Chief Inspector Fox, great name by the way, who happens to be a good man, but due to the fact that he's involved with the politicians, his hands are tied most of the time. And then we also have Wei Fong and his son, who, due to a misunderstanding, actually end up opposing the Iron Monkey for the first half of the movie. Well, the idea of telling the story through these subplots does sound interesting, and the subplots all come together and intersect very nicely by the end of the film. Unfortunately, well, they all feel very rushed as a consequence of trying to tell the main story while at the same time telling their own story. Many of the character details we're given feel very rushed and altogether completely superfluous to the main story. Most of them are just thrown out there because I guess the creators thought we needed more character details, but couldn't really shovel them in throughout the entire film. So there are quite a few bombs dropped all the time in this movie, like Orchid being a prostitute or Dr. Kang's murdering his dad. Oh, don't worry, I'm not spoiling much for you. I'm not kidding when I say that Dr. Kang murdering his father is brought up all of once in this entire movie, and it's the same with Orchid being a prostitute. It's just sort of a detail that is thrown out there. I will give the Orchid subplot some credit because it is actually told in flashback, but altogether it's just irrelevant. It's just a character detail that's thrown out to try and make us acclimate to the character more, but it feels very shoved in and completely out of place with the scene that it's put into. Needless to say, character development has pretty much gone to hell, with the characters starting out and finishing in pretty much the same place. But they do get a bit of development, but like I said, it's pretty forced and relies heavily on contrivance and, to a point, cliches. But luckily, that does not detract from the awesome ass-kicking action. And this is why I love this movie so much, folks. The action is fantastic. This is what I look for in a martial arts movie. You can go ahead and say I'm shallow about this, but to me, in a martial arts flick, the story is completely secondary to the fight scenes. And since there aren't a whole lot of boring talky bits in this movie, it means we get a whole lot of action. And it is all fantastic. It's all very well choreographed, but as I've already said, it has a very nice pedigree behind it. And while it does delve into the realm of unbelievability here and there, then again, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and The Matrix both did the exact same thing. And here, it actually looks pretty good. Though I do have to admit, well, as much fighting as there is, there's always room for more. Special props must be given to the final fight scene of the movie, because it is one of the most suspenseful and most thrilling climaxes I have seen in a martial arts movie in quite a while. Both the heroes and the main villain are fighting over a pit of fire after their clothes have been drenched in alcohol, meaning that going anywhere near the fire pretty much means a death sentence to anyone. I will also say that the sets, scenery, and music in the movie actually do fit the mood very well. I actually buy that this is an ancient Chinese village, though the music itself is a tad too orchestral and kind of ruins the mood here and there, but it is decidedly epic when it needs to be. Though the dubbing kind of ruins it. It's not even that the dub actors are that bad either. Technically speaking, all the actors in this movie are leagues above pretty much everyone else who's been doing dub voices in all the other martial arts movies that I've reviewed up to this point. But the main problem here is, well, this is supposed to be a story that's taking place in a feudal mountaintop village somewhere in ancient China, right? The actors in this movie just sound way too American to have me believe that.
Don't do that! Oh, no! No! Wait! Dad, you can't do this! You've no proof! My dad did nothing wrong!
You there! Shut up! He thinks he can tell the governor how to govern his court.
Keep your tribute. If it's stolen, either you know who, I can't replace it.
Iron Monkey?
Ooh, ooh, ooh.
This is where I actually find myself in a bit of new territory here. I usually don't mind a bad dub because that actually adds to the campy value of a movie. In my opinion, a bad dub can actually make a martial arts movie a bit more enjoyable, even if it is essentially a bad movie. But the problem here is, it's a good movie, and it's a good dub. But the fact that the characters don't sound at all Asian anymore, well, it's about the only time I could ever say I was actually put off a little by a competent dub. However, with all of the flaws that I've pointed out, this still remains, in my point of view, the best martial arts movie that I have reviewed so far on this show. The reason being, its action is definitely enough to carry it. While its story is pretty basic and cliche, it is not a bad story. It's just one that's been done several times over, but it's still one that can be enjoyed, especially with action of this caliber. Not to mention, the characters are actually extraordinarily likable, and while the humor in the movie is basic slapstick comedy most of the time, it is actually very welcome, and gives the whole film a bit of a light-hearted tone. There's nothing too terribly dark about it, like some of the more grittier martial arts movies I've seen. And that's all I'm asking for. A straightforward and simple plot that has some likable characters. It doesn't have to be a great plot, but so long as there is one that is easy to follow and gives us plenty of opportunities for some great action, I don't really care much. It doesn't have to be complicated. I don't get why most filmmakers don't realize this. And before you say I'm gushing over this movie just because it's a more recent release, it has actual pedigree behind it for one thing, and second, even though the movies I've reviewed are much older and many of them have fallen into the public domain, here's the thing. There are plenty of great martial arts flicks out there that exist in the public domain that are, for all intents and purposes, fantastically done and fill all of the criteria I have mentioned, but for one reason or another never reach the mainstream audiences the way that a movie like this does. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. If you are a martial arts buff, then you will definitely enjoy it. If you are a person who likes some more substance with your movies, you're gonna have to look elsewhere because the martial arts genre as a whole usually does not encompass very much substance. The reason we watch it is to see people getting punched in the face, and occasionally getting kicked in the balls.